Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
hello,
Hello.
Charlie. Sorry
How you
about
Wow.
all this.
doing?
It's like magic. We're all connected
It
in a
really
single
is like
place.
magic, though.
Yeah,
So welcome to the show. I mean, it's a very informal thing,
I,
as you can probably
yeah.
tell.
This is it. You're in the podcast now.
Yeah.
And
What's
no one's
happening?
wearing a tie. Yeah, it's shameful.
No one's wearing a tie. I don't think even Nick's wearing a t-shirt.
Well,
I believe you made a comment about my hoodie last time, so I'm just
it's
getting you back.
revenge.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think it's not really is it a learning podcast? Nobody knows. I think it's more about adventures, things that we learned from our respective adventures. And I perceive you, John, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but as somebody who has led quite an adventurous life. Is that accurate, that perception, John?
I don't really think of it as adventurous so much as kind of, when I talk about my career, I think of that as something going very fast downhill and completely accidental. And no, I mean, it's just been extremely kind of accidental and contingent and all the rest of it. And that started really early on from when I was at school, because I think the only thing I ever really wanted to be was a novelist. I wanted to write books. So I was very bookish. I was literate very early on. I could read before I went to school, and they thought I was sort of there was something wrong with me because I'd spent the whole time staring out the window and didn't pay any attention. And they took me out and gave me all sorts of tests to find out what was wrong with me. And what was wrong with me, it turned out, was that I could read, and they were giving us these books which were kind of Janet and John in those days. The dog saw John threw the ball. The dog ran after the ball, and I was thinking, well, this is fucking boring, and staring out of the window because I was already kind of reading quite fluently. So then they just put me up a form. And it kind of carried on from that. And at my grammar school, they had this thing where you saw a careers teacher, and it came to my turn as you're getting towards, sort of 15, 16. And you were supposed to tell them what you wanted to be. And all I really wanted to be was a novelist.
Uh-huh.
But I thought, I can't say that because they'll just get angry and throw things at me. So I said, I want to be a journalist. And the careers teacher kind of gave me a funny look, said, I don't think you're bright enough for that.
That's the spirit. That's what careers teachers are for, crushing the soul. It's all in a day's
Yes.
work.
Yes. I went to university and studied English literature. And in my final year there, I got into a punk ska band and became a musician instead. And we kind of became a John Peel band, and then we had a hit single. We were on top of the pops, and started having arguments about who was getting the money, and broke up. And then I went into busking, started a busking band because I was fed up with capitalism, and then that got successful too. And we went to the Edinburgh Festival, won a Perrier Award the first year it was awarded, got a Channel 4 series of mini musicals, wrote music for that, acted in that, wrote scripts, and did some obscure house records when all that broke out. I should say that the people I was in the busking group with went on to form Stomp, and because of my kind of ambition to one day be a writer, I thought, well, I don't want to hit dustbins for a living, so I didn't join Stomp. Made some obscure house records, got married, and then drifted into marketing. I went to as a telemarketing temp in a West End advertising agency. They just opened up telemarketing bureau, and we were doing kind of inbound calls for food crisis emergencies. You remember them? They had a lot of the kind of BSE stuff like that. And we had to answer the phone to all these worried people and tell them to throw away the stuff that's past its sell-by date and obvious stuff like that. And through that, kind of got to the attention of other people within the group. Knocked around a bit with the PR group there, who called Burson Marstella, who seemed to be wonderful people, very kind of very educated, very very English, very public school. And then we looked at their client list, and they were all kind of South American dictatorships and companies like Philip Morris. And that was the kind of crisis management work that they did that we'd been doing on the phone lines. It was the most data intensive part of that whole agency, the telemarketing operation. So I kind of got familiar with computers from then. And then roll was on a bit. I got married, decided to move back to Brighton because I was fed up of commuting, opened up as a marketing consultant, got no work for 4 years. Here was the chance to write my novel. So I did. That got published. And then immediately we were completely broke by then. So I had to start getting to work, worked in PR.
What was the title of the novel, John, by the way? You've got to plug it. Come on.
Mother Tongue. I
Mother
don't plug
Tongue.
it that much because I thought I wanted it to be edgy and to cover kind of taboo subjects. And it was about a boy who liked his mother a bit too much. A lot of it went down pretty well. It got, well reviewed in The Guardian, The Independent, stuff like that. I was doing sort of book appearances. But it attracted an awful lot of interest from the wrong kind of people, let me say. I won't go into it any more than that. And the whole experience is rather alarming. And I found out one thing about kind of British literary culture, which is that if you write a non-fiction book and publish it in Britain, everyone will assume that it's a pack of lies. If you write a fiction book, everyone thinks that it's disguised autobiography. So I had a lot of, to put it short, a lot of pedos reaching out to me as a fellow traveller, which I certainly wasn't at all.
Wow.
So I then started working on the second book, which never quite appeared. In the meantime, I'd started working for an e-learning startup company, meeting people like Charles Jennings. I really thought it was quite inspiring and so on. I then got headhunted to go work for Epic with Donald Clark. They had a very bright bunch of people there, like all the people who started Kineo, Steve Rayson, and so on. And so that's how I kind of really got into the learning tech industry. And I've been going to learning tech every year ever since, virtually non-stop. So I did, work for a number of kind of learn tech providers as a head of marketing and became a consultant and sort of drifted is the word really, rather than careering into podcasting. And that weirdly became a career.
When you look back, because it's an extraordinary roller coaster, I think it's not overstated. Which was the best bit? Which do you think was the most fun? What do you think? Well, that was...
Yeah, people always assume it's being on top of the pops.
Yeah, I think I assumed that. It's vicariously.
Which was a laugh, which was, but it was kind of, it wasn't like seriously fulfilling kind of laugh. It was great to meet Mary Hopkins, who was working, who had a record called Those Were the Days, which was popular when I was a kid. And she was working as a sound mixer upstairs in the studio, because you got the studio tour, and we met Hot Chocolate.
It started with a kiss. That was Hot Chocolate. That was the first record I bought.
Yeah, and Brian Ferry was in. We bumped into him in the makeup queue.
What was he like?
He was great, actually, very friendly. And he'd just come back from a Caribbean holiday and had this big fuck off tan. Sorry, do you have to bleep that, or is that okay?
We leave swearing in.
Yeah, he had this big tan, and we said, what are you going to make up for? You already look great, being fawning kind of Roxy fans. And he just said, just that extra sparkle.
You were a punk band, John. Didn't that mean that you kind of, you eschewed politeness? You sort of spat on people and punched them if they looked in your direction? Isn't that? Because I remember that era. I mean, punk bands were pretty, they did some pretty,
Yeah, you must have done some crazy stuff.
Trying to avoid people trying to beat me up. I spoke roughly to a few people. I have a minor criminal conviction for criminal damage due to a kind of spray painting evening. I probably took every jug known to man. All in the same evening, actually. I had opium once. I couldn't tell you what the effects are because I was also speeding out of my mind and all the rest of it. It was a lot of fun of the bad sort. I think probably the best times are things like we were on the van. We lived in the back of a transit. On the back of a van one night, we'd never been on the radio or anything like that. And John Peel played our record, which we'd just put out on a kind of indie record label. And I remember getting out of the van and all dancing around with joy in a lay-by in the middle of the night. Those sort of moments were just brilliant, and things like doing Rock Against Racism tours and stuff in the early days. The kind of the bit where we got famous was not as thrilling as people think it is, because you suddenly have to make all kind of decisions about people who write the songs are earning more than the other people. You start falling out. It kind of, a band is like a big family, and then the family falls out over success. Success splits up more bands than abject failure. We were, pretty pretty poor and just kind of rumbling along in the back of a transit van and extremely cheap guest houses, ridden places for several years. And that only kind of brought us together, a whiff of success, and lead singer starts going out with the head of the record company. And suddenly things all do get a bit weird. That was kind of less fun. There's been lots and lots of fun along the way, I have to say.
What was the funnest e-learning moment you've ever had?
The funnest e-learning moment.
What's the obviously the questions that you probably get asked when you tell that story as you focus on all the rock and roll, but what about the times?
I think it was a lot of fun at Epic, actually, going out on client meetings and stuff. And I did a lot of think tank dinners where you'd organize those and kind of facilitate them, which obviously led on to podcasting. I then thought of that at the time. And it was things like going into the cabinet office because we had a leadership program. And there were these kind of rather scruffy Brighton types who kind of scrubbed up and tried to look like they were from McKinsey rather than ex-art college people from Brighton. Going into the cabinet office, meeting very young sort of, I suppose you call them spads nowadays, and talking through how we were going to promote this learning program. And it was exciting suddenly to be, when you've had a very kind of bizarre and jagged kind of CV like mine, there is a moment when you think, oh, this is so interesting. I mean, not having a conventional career has its downsides, mostly financial, but you find yourself in the most bizarre places. And we did a think tank dinner at Shrivenham, which is the Defence Academy, not Sandringham. Sorry. What's the big Defence Academy? Sandhurst. Not that one. It's kind of the, second one down. But a place where very thoughtful, interesting people in the military, and you discover all these things you never knew, like that the Navy is really the brightest of the bunch, the most well-considered, the senior service. And all these people who kind of fell into a weird kind of Wilfred Owen or Rupert Brookmore like sort of soldier poet, thinker, philosopher brand. I didn't expect to see that, getting involved in defence procurement and learning technologies. It was just the kind of, perhaps that's the thing that I find really interesting, is unexpected, interesting discoveries about the world and about life that I kind of fall into accidentally by not being particularly attentive about my career path.
I think I certainly respect that. I think I've enjoyed less of that than you, and probably in my latter years. But you just reminded me of a story. I did some work with defence, and I was invited to this incredibly swanky evening, which was bow ties and dinner jackets at some kind of military college. And I turned up there, as you do, expecting it to be like one of those hotels. And the room that I was assigned to was, I can only describe it as like very much like a prison cell. And there absolutely was no towel there, and there was a communal shower. And I was like, whoa, I just need to get ready for this incredibly posh dinner. And there was no towel. So I went to reception, said, have you got any towels? And they said, no. And there was a huge, great, like, lead pipe. And there was one lagging above reception, so you could towel that had been wrapped there for maybe several years. And I said, well, can I have that one? They said, well, it's a bit dirty. And I said, well, I don't mind. Anything will do. And they grabbed this towel from lagging the pipe, and I jumped in the showers, which is a lot like boarding school, to be honest, and kind of probably good reasons for that. Yeah, went to this super posh dinner with, as you say, some extraordinary people, both very accomplished and very kind of thoughtful as well. But I have enjoyed more of that, I think, later on in life. And I also feel like those have been some of the highlights, the extraordinary, the kind of the memorable, the unusual. What else would you, aside from the dancing and the lay-by when you were played on the John Peel, any other kind of things that spring to mind when you think about the really weird situations you found yourself in?
Yes. I'm trying to think what I can kind of air publicly.
Based on what you've said so far, John.
Covered assault and drugs. So what else is there?
There's a lot. Yeah, no. This is where the lack of preparation does me in, because the things that flash before my eyes aren't necessary. There is a weird thing about performers, and it's not just me. I know it's from other people. But if you ask us to kind of, what was your best gig? What actually flashes through the front of your brain are bad gigs. I mean, you may not have many, but terrible gigs where you absolutely died a death, they stay with you forever. It's like those kind of, very vain writers who forget all their good reviews but remember all the bad ones. And I remember things like Keithley Death House, which is when I was in the busking band with the Pookies, and we were a big hit everywhere because we had, Luke Creswell of Stomp and Steve, who were amazing performers and could warm up any audience. But we did this gig once in a club in Keighley to a load of very stony-faced people who just stared at us and no sound before, during, or afterwards. Keithley Death House, we called it, and I think it was actually called Keithley Fun House till we played there. A weird one, actually, was we did a thing called the Mayfest in Glasgow, which was a festival, because we'd done Edinburgh festivals, and that was very well known. And they were trying to set cultural things up in Glasgow with a load of, Blair Brown money, no doubt. And did this thing called the Mayfest, which was really good, has some brilliant people there. And we played a workers' canteen on the Clyde, I think, where all the cranes and the ships, and we go into this huge canteen and all these very stony-faced Scottish. I mean, do you think Donald Clark could be stony-faced? These guys, kind of immense, built like brick shit houses, glaring at us. But we went down okay there. We played at lunchtime in their canteen, and that was bizarre. And we stayed in the barracks, which sounds a bit like the place that you were in, because it had this kind of community focus. But then the hotel we were staying in, we were in the same hotel as Jack Bruce. Remember him, the bass player of Cream? And it was much later in his career. We were in the bar downstairs, getting pissed after the gig, and Jack Bruce and his entourage marched through from the front door of the hotel straight through to the lifts. And I just happened to be passing. And my neck snapped back. I thought, that's Jack Bruce. And I had all those Cream albums, and I was like staring at him. And they all him and his minders got into and I was looking, and suddenly, before the doors closed, he caught my eye, and so I was looking at him, and it was kind of, who are you looking at, Jimmy? kind of moment. And he lunged towards me, and his minders, obviously realizing he was on a short fuse, grabbed him to stop him running at me and killing me. And I had this view of him foaming with anger, trying to kill me if he could get at me, as the doors kind of came shut slowly. And, I just, I was kind of on my own in this lobby. What the fuck just happened? Went back to the bar, and, that was it. And there was another thing we did. We did a street festival in Derry, and we met Fergal Sharkey there from the Undertones. Huge fan of that band, just the best. And he was there afterwards in the dressing room and said, "Oh, come back to my house, and, have a party." And we said, "Okay, so how do we get there? Give us directions." "So, no, just get a taxi. Tell the taxi driver Fergal's place. They all know me," which was a bit dodgy, but turned out to be the truth. And we went back to his house and had a very nice time and drinks. We had a female member of the group, and Fergal's wife at the time, who was an Avon representative in a spare time, did a makeover on Sue from the Pookies. I mean, that all seemed surreal, but it was that kind of thing, really. The busking group was a lot more fun because you got off the beaten track, really, a lot more than you did in a touring band.
Yeah. I once supported somebody I was in a relationship with who was a singer and would tour all of these working men's clubs, and it was really interesting. So, it's a pale shadow, I think, of what you're describing, John, but you got to see another side of life, because I would have been working in kind of corporate jobs, going in and out in a suit and a tie. But by evening, I was playing the backing tracks, and we set up the equipment, and working men's clubs in places like Luton. And it was like, it was just another world, and the sorts of experiences that you would have there. And as you say, John, sometimes you just get no reaction at all. And these are kind of lifeless zombies for an audience, and things that sort of left a really unsettling feeling in your mind afterwards. But yeah, they are the things, I like your description, they are the things that stay with you. I'm also interested, though, as somebody who has achieved many of the things that younger people aspire to, especially today, fame. I think it's a different kind of fame that people are looking for now. They want to be influencers or whatever, or rock stars, and publishing a novel, that kind of stuff. I'm not asking you to tell people, that stuff doesn't matter, but when you kind of reflect on it, which do you see as the best bits, the bits when you think, yeah, that was when I really felt I was myself, or I became who I am?
Yeah, publishing the novel was a thing because I'd never been necessarily that proud of the records we made. I thought the Piranhas was the band I was in, the ska punk band, was a good live band. I thought we were great. I liked the songs we wrote. I wrote about half of them. And there was a lot of humor in it, a lot of performance in it. I don't think we ever translated well onto records. So I wasn't massively proud of any of the records we made, even in the hit single. I felt slightly distanced from that because it had become, excuse me, it was something that we did as an encore instrumental. Tom Hark, it was a South African Quailer record. And Pete Waterman, who we were talking to at the time, got very excited and said it was a hit, wanted to make a hit record out of it. I thought, well, fair enough. And said, I need some lyrics, so who can write some lyrics? And the person who was least hungover that morning, had to be Boring Bob Grover, our lead singer, wrote the lyrics. He was, we'd kind of shared the lead vocals, and he became the lead vocalist after that. But in those ways, I felt distance. When I actually published the novel, I remember reading it back and thinking, yeah, this is okay. I actually feel quite proud of this. I felt very proud of it. And it got published and well reviewed and so on. I thought it was going to change my life. It was a massive disappointment when it didn't. And I know other authors, and you see them when they've just been signed up with a big deal with sort of like Penguin, Random House or whatever, and then you see them another 3 books on and they can't get arrested because the sales of the follow-up weren't so good. And and I remember my editor after the first book was published, we were in the Coach and Horses, which is a notorious kind of literary waterhole in at Cambridge Circus in London. And he was looking around and he'd been too eaten and was, although he liked to go to loose clubs, seemed to know the way the world worked in a way that people from those schools do. And he just looked around and said, look, is what you really want to be a middle-aged, mid-list author bumping along through life? I mean, he left publishing shortly after that, and I never quite produced my second novel. I mean, I've still got a lot of drafts in drawers and things like that. I never got around to it. I think it's the spectre of becoming a mid-list author. And now you can't get arrested as a mid-list author, I have to say. So I mean, that was very satisfying. Doing conferences as a kind of head of marketing, I ran a couple of conferences for one of the companies that we did, quite small things, but only put up kind of 5, 6 speakers. But I had a real sense of achievement with that. Producing a magazine, I did again for Lumess, for Andrea Miles, wonderful person. That was really satisfying. Some brand projects I did with my friend Mark Altman were great. He's a real genius. Funnily enough, he had done graphics for Top of the Pops. But going through those design projects where we kind of created a brand were really exciting. You have a real sense of fulfillment in an odd way. I don't think people ever think of that because branding and logos and that whole area is sort of something rather evil. And I quite agree with them in a way. But if I think of it, it's not kind of, when I sold my company and made my first 12 million or whatever, because that never happened. It's actually producing something that you feel proud of, I think, is the thing that gets me off. I mean, that sounds terribly like virtue signaling and very worthy. I mean, it's just a kind of source of recognition on my part that that's what drives me. And also, my greatest sadness really is I haven't made a lot of money.
Given everything that as you've outlined, and the things that you reflect on being kind of your successes, what are the moments where you have like the biggest wave of gratitude? Because I've reflected recently on gratitude as a theme for this year, but there are also definitely certain moments where I feel that more than others. So I'd just be interested to hear, when is that for you? When are you feeling most gratitude?
A lot of gratitude to the people I've worked with in the industry, I suppose. People like Steve Rayson and Donald Clark, a number of others, Andrea Miles, who would sponsor you in wild ideas or to, would give you the funding to go ahead and do things, or the encouragement. I feel some gratitude to Donald for doing Great Minds on Learning with me, because I think that has really stretched me and broadened my horizons about what you can do with podcasting. And he's been very generous with his time and all the rest of it on that. I feel a lot of retrospective gratitude, which is slightly tinged with regret, to my grandfather, who all of the males in my family were extremely taciturn. very British, very upper stiffer lip, both been in the military and didn't talk that much about it. My grandfather especially was I thought at the time, very straight-laced. I didn't get on with him. I was a kind of long-haired hippie at the time. But I do remember an occasion where he'd been in the trenches in the First World War. A lot of his friends had died. He didn't talk a lot about it, but he'd read a leader in the Times or an article in the Times by somebody saying that the Christmas truce had never happened, that it was a fabrication. And he was very angry about this. You know, some long-haired lefty in the Times, it was quite left-leaning in those days before Murdoch, saying that this truce never happened because he was there. He very rarely talked to me, actually, but at this occasion he did insist that I sit down and read his letters back from the front, which were mostly requests for socks. But also one of them said, "Oh, well, can you send a football?" Because we had this football match with the Germans in between the lines Christmas Eve the other day, and it might happen again, and it'd be nice to have a football if we do that, because we lost the one that, you know, we were playing with. And he really wanted to fix in my memory, as someone a lot younger than him, that this had actually happened. And I've thought about it again and again over the years in various different ways. Like, it kind of came home to me when I found out more about the First World War, exactly what he'd been through and how awful that must have been. I read the diaries online of, I think, Henry Williamson, author of Tark the Otter, regrettably became a big British fascist. But he had a very fulsome diary from his part of the trenches, which was almost exactly the same place as where my grandfather was. So that my grandfather, I should say, showed me some photographs, which are in the Imperial War Museum now, of him and German soldiers and so on. And Henry Williamson recounted very similar things. So having that kind of small baton past was really interesting. Also, his kind of Scandinavian heritage. He was Norwegian. He married a Finnish-Swedish woman. When I started to have problems with my blood sugar, and I was told this was hereditary, I thought back on my grandfather's diet. He used to eat very dark brown bread with slices of smoked salmon and very little else, and that's why he lived to 90. My mother killed my father with carbohydrates. He died of a stroke before he reached 70. So I'm grateful to my grandfather, and I now similarly follow bits of his diet. And also the fact that I have a Norwegian heritage. I went back to the part, sorry, I'm rambling, went back to the bit of Norway where the family were from and met a local historian who gave us a tour of the places they'd all lived. They had been in shipping, they'd been sea captains, and then went into maritime insurance, and then came to the City of London. So I'm kind of grateful for that they did that they came over here, and for that heritage.
And what adventures lie ahead? Because there's so many behind you. What adventures, what exciting? How do you top that, John?
I don't really think about topping it. I think of more kind of bizarre, lateral, orthogonal moves. And the latest one is launching a new podcast, which will start off in the learning feed, but it's actually slightly different. It's about science fiction and technology. Always been interested in science fiction. Always worked in technology, learning tech, and to bring those two together. So it's about the developments in science, because science fiction, I should say, is 100 years old. Officially, the genre starts in 1926 with the first publication of Amazing Stories. And that is 100 years old in April. So we're starting this podcast about that past century, how science has fed into stories and how those stories have generated the enthusiasm and the inspiration for people to then create great technology. You look at any tech founder, I'm hesitant to mention the name of Elon Musk, but I'll go ahead because his achievements in kind of space rockets and so on are very great, even though he's an execrable father. And he was inspired by science fiction early on. A lot of the technologists are inspired by science fiction. And now we're all living in science fiction. All the things that we once thought were fictions, a lot of them are reality. Some of them didn't come true.
Yeah, I meant
Where's my jetpack? Where's my flying car?
Jetpack and the hoverboards and Back to the Future.
And the hoverboards.
But I was going to ask about
they
that.
exist.
Yeah, really? But not the magnetic levitation ones?
I saw Tesla have built something similar. I saw a guy in Saudi driving one around.
I saw the ones which are just basically your drones. You're just basically standing on a couple of fans.
It's a version of the same thing, isn't it? I guess
so. But I wanted to ask about that because I was also fascinated, addicted, I guess, to science fiction growing up, Asimov and a whole bunch of other stuff that I've forgotten,
Yeah.
as well as the TV series Star Trek. And we now seem to be living through an era where some of it, at least, as you say, is being realized. I heard somebody say last year that they thought this might be the last robot-free summer. And I'm not sure it will be this summer, but it will certainly be next summer that robots become part of the everyday. And I wondered, what are you most excited about as a fellow sci-fi geek about what is the things that you can see being realized? Which of those do you think is most exciting?
Well, just to answer that specific point about robots, no. We must promised us self-driving cars every year for about 5 years in a row. It's kind of given up. It's not interested in cars anymore. Things take a while. Things take longer to come about than you think they were, and then sometimes less time for other things. Robots are actually still quite a primitive. I interviewed a Stanford professor who also has a company that creates AI software for robots, and he's very into robotics. Jan Lippert. And we hope to have him on the science fiction series talking about Asimov's laws. You mentioned Asimov, his 3 laws of robotics and how they use them nowadays to kind of sort out ethical dilemmas, or at least as a jumping off point. But I put to him that, the progress in robotics is actually quite slow compared to AI. He says, not a bit of it. And he points to kind of self-driving cars and so on, and San Francisco and Waymo and all that. And that is quite true in a way. And of course, massive dark factories all over the place, robotics in manufacturing every day. But your robot butler, your robot in your house, they're still nowhere near being able to unload a dishwasher. I mean, people tell you they can, but and very often in the demonstration of robotics, they're kind of online now to a guy at a computer with a headset pushing buttons. There's a kind of element of mechanical Turk about a lot of those. And when pressed, I think there was a Swedish launch last year, and he was pressed in a podcast interview about soon it would actually be before we had these kind of robots in domestic settings. And he was saying the ones they're releasing now are enormously expensive. They know it's not really practical and they need a lot of help to do anything, but they want people to get used to the idea of them being around, because that will give them a revenue stream to be able to develop robotics to the point where they can really be what the dream is. So I think that's several years out as far as I can see.
It's a fascinating area. I've been tracking some of that as well. I saw that scandal. I can't remember which maker it was, that their robots were actually being remotely controlled by somebody in India.
Yeah, mechanical Turk is the shorthand term for it. Yeah.
And I guess that, in a sense, I'm not too worried about that, because I think the shortcomings, the great advances in AI were due to the fact we were able to feed it all the text. What we weren't able to feed it is all the dash cam footage from driving cars. But, one assumes that they're, hell-bent now on gathering as much real-time video interaction as possible, which I guess is why Meta this scandal was sending, a lot of the video, somewhere else to kind of train up an AI model that can navigate the world as humans do. So I think they'll crack it pretty quickly. And as you say, John, I think at the moment it's more of a marketing thing. I think they want to start to seed the idea of robots as part of the everyday.
Yeah.
And then that will be a bit of a springboard.
Where it will come is that you can have a kind of robot dog that teaches your kid maths. I mean, the kind of brain function of it is, you're going to have a being in the house who's much too smart, right? Because AI is moving, intelligence is moving much quicker than the kind of motor skills we'll take for granted, like, pick up a glass, move it from here to there, put it in your mouth without smashing it on your metal face. That stuff is a lot harder. Walking upstairs is a lot harder than summarizing Wittgenstein, it turns out. So you will have these beings in your home, but it's going to be more like Jeeves and your Bertie Wooster. I think that you've got a cleverer person around.
I like the idea of the robot
to
dog
kind of help you out.
Teaches your kid maths and occasionally pushes right-wing ideologies.
Well, yeah, they've got to watch out for that as well. Yeah, but I mean, your robot, your kind of domestic robot, is more likely to instruct you in the best way to stack your dishwasher than to actually do it for you.
I'm going to have to go, guys. It was an absolute pleasure having
Thank
you
you very
on
much,
the
John.
show, John.
Thank you. I'm sorry
thank you
about
so
rabbiting
much.
on about the pulse so much, but you
All
asked
good.
me.
I did.
Yeah, no, it was very
I
interesting.
loved
Thank
your
you.
answers.
Nice
Cool.
one.
But I hope to bump into you in real life sometime, John.
Going to Learning Tech?
Maybe. We'll
We're
see.
having a
Yeah.
party, John. I'll send
Oh
you the
yeah,
invite.
the boat party. Yeah.
You're invited to as well, Nick.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Well,
All right.
Yeah. Send you the link. All right.
Ahoy,
Cheers.
ahoy there, mateys.
Cheers, Noel.
cheers. Ahoy.